Hi everyone, welcome to the community classroom. Before we even get started with this discussion, I'm going to ask that each of you undertake something. So it's a homework assignment. And the homework assignment involves researching your names. And it's all of your names, all of the things that you are called by. So your first name, your middle name, your last name, your nationality, your ethnic group, tribe, clan, all of those names that you might be called. And this is really important. I want you to look at the etymologies of the names, the histories of the names, the different spellings of the names, the origin of the names, and then take some time and think about the extent to which each of the names, just how beneficial these names are for you or how detrimental they might be. Because each time someone calls someone by something, there is power in that. Because whatever they are saying, whenever they call your name, they are invoking whatever that is. So if your name means a particular thing, each time they say your name, they are invoking whatever that is, and they are referring to you in that way. And you're going to see how important this is when we address this issue with Barbados and Barbuda. But this issue is prevalent with a number of names, and you will see that as you start to do some research. And some of the research is kind of problematic because of the names and the origins of the names. And this stuff has been glossed over as people have been attempting to sort of obscure and make it really esoteric in terms of the origins of some of these names. And these are just two examples. There are more because we're going to be looking at Barbados, Barbuda, Barbary, Berber. So we're going to be looking at a number of dynamics that are all related. And I want you to keep this quote in mind by this professor. It is, with the technology of naming, man truly becomes the master of all the species. Not only that, but when people call you something, they are sort of exerting a type of power. When someone is naming something or naming someone, they are exerting a type of power. And there is something going on in pop culture right now, a title of something, and it talks about calling someone by a particular thing. And so when someone calls you by a particular thing, it has meaning and it has power, and you need to understand what people are calling you when they are calling you certain names. You already know that there are issues with, for instance, referring to people as crayon colors. There's a problem with that. And so that needs to be addressed, and people need to understand the extent to which they feel comfortable or uncomfortable with that. And that needs to be addressed because there is a lot of manipulation that goes on with naming. And so we're going to talk about this with Barbados and Barbuda right quick. As we jump into this, just a heads up here. These names are rooted in some spiritual dynamics. And so that issue has been glossed over by, and this is a common theme, when there is obscurity related to a name, particularly in the Americas, the fallback is on saying that it's probably a name that the indigenous people used, and this is probably some variation of it. Well, let me assure you that this is not a variation of any names used by the indigenous people. These are definitely colonizer names, and not only that political colonizing, but a spiritual colonizing, but not necessarily of the type that you might be thinking. Let's get started. Let's jump right into this. Here we have a commentary on the geography of Barbados, and this is from the New World Encyclopedia. And they indicate that the origin of the name Barbados is unclear. Of course, it's always going to be unclear when you're talking about indigenous lands and indigenous people and the origins and the names. And so anyway, what's important here to note is that the usual suspect in terms of discovering things, this group back during that time was sort of like JJ and the Evans family. always discovering things. At any rate, so the Portuguese were the discoverers of this particular island, Barbados. And then as early as 1511, they referred to the island as Barbados. And it was the island of the bearded ones. And this was in an official Portuguese document. Now, one of the explanations is that this came from this bearded fig tree. You know how those trees have moss and things like that in certain parts of the islands and even in certain parts of southern United States. And so that's one of the explanation, is that the trees appeared bearded. But of course, that's not the truth. Well, what was going on is they were naming the place after what was familiar to them, and it gave them power of naming. And so it really didn't have anything to do with those trees. It had to do with something else, and you're going to see exactly what that something else is. And so you have a couple of families that are also sharing this name. And of course, the families would come out of Romance language regions. So you first have Barbado coming out of Italy. And it indicates that this is a very ancient surname and that this was also considered a nickname. And by using nicknames, it was a popular way to give people another name. And another thing about this whole Barbados situation is that the name, you think about barber, the name came from the idea of a bearded person. So naturally bearded barber, Barbados. And here you see this Roman dynamic with Barbados, and it's first found in Milan. And here you can see a number of variations in terms of that surname with these spellings, and always starting off with the B-A-R-B. And here you jump over to Spain, another Romance language space, and you see this name just switched out the T for the D. And you can see here history of the migration of the Barbado family, and it indicates that they were involved in the colonization of Cuba and Mexico, and also America. And we're talking as early as the 1500s. And so this is prior to any official launching of the transatlantic slave trade. And surprise, surprise, what other name is this associated with but Barbary? Also called the Barbary States. And so this name originates from that of the Berbers. This is all the same name: Barbary, Berbers, Barbado, Barbados. And this name is coming out of North Africa. So in that area of Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Algeria. You should note that this Berber surname appears in England, and it's also associated with the name meaning son of Barbara, also a nickname for someone such as a Moor or a Berber. Now keep in mind that the Berbers, Barbary, they were all involved in what was known as the Barbary Coast slave trade. And here you can see some of the variations. The spelling variations for Berber involve Barbary, 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 a variety of ways of spelling Barbary. And here you start to get into the etymology of barb, and it has a meaning of strange, foreign, or barbarous. And as you've probably also figured out, it is tied to the word barbarian. And so that is the root of barbarian. And here you have barbarian as both an adjective and a noun. We started off looking at this assertion that the naming of Barbados was uncertain. The origin of the name was uncertain, and all of the speculation about bearded trees. And so we know that the name is associated with bearded one, and this source is going to give us very clear understandings about the names Barbados and Barbuda. While the original naming may have seemed very innocent, Here you see in this source that this particular name, Barbados and Barbuda, these names are associated with what was known as a bearded demon. Now, this particular bearded demon was one who taught the secrets of the Philosopher's Stone. Now, this demon Barbu is not to be confused with Barbados, which was a great and powerful demon who was the Duke of Hades. And so you see you've got a couple of demons going on here with these bearded demons. You've got one Barbu, which would be the root of Barbuda, and then you see Barbados. And so some may say, well, that's probably not true. But you can see that when the colonizers were naming the place, they came up with the name, but then there was speculation about why the name came about. And so this story about these trees was offered. There was even an offering that perhaps they were using this name because the Indians, the Amerindians who were there, were bearded. But you can see very clearly that that is not what this was about. And if you were wondering what the Philosopher's Stone is all about, it's a part of Western alchemy, and it's an unknown substance that was considered this powder or tincture that could possibly transform metals into precious ones, especially gold and silver. And also there was the belief that there was an elixir that was an elixir of life that could be derived from it. And here you can see these two bearded entities holding tridents. And the holding of the trident is very important for connecting all of these dots. And you'll see exactly why. Now, of course, if you are from Barbados, you already know. And here are some additional bearded entities. You'll notice that the bearded entities also have horns coming out of their heads. And as we move to wrap this up, this is just a quick notation, again, connecting that Barbary and Barbados. You can see here two slave ships named Barbary, and the principal place of purchase of enslaved persons, Barbados. Now, for those who indicated back in the 1500s that perhaps this country, this island country, was named based upon some trees that had moss that appeared bearded, you know, based upon this flag, that that is not likely the case. And so you have this flag, the Barbados flag, with this trident, suggesting that there was already awareness in naming the island, that they were naming the island in association with those bearded entities holding the trident. And so the implications are that this country's name is associated with these entities. And so now, instead of the people calling themselves by whatever their ethnic groups were, or whatever they were calling themselves before encountering the busy little travelers around the world, they had names prior to that. But what happened is that those names were replaced with this name. And so they are now calling themselves by the name of these entities. And so this is one of the reasons why it's really, really important for people to get a better understanding of all of these colonizer names. The colonizers had a reason for giving the names. It's important that you understand what the names are, the meanings of those names, and whether or not those names serve you well or not. Remember, do your assignment, and knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.